I'm 95 years old, and there's 11 miles of frozen mountain road in North Korea that I still walk in my sleep some nights, a man's full weight across my shoulders, snow up past my knees, and not one single sign that he was still alive. December 1950, the retreat from the Chosin Reservoirs down toward Hungnam. Temperatures I still can't describe to anyone who wasn't there without sounding like I'm exaggerating. I wasn't. 30 below, some nights colder. I was 19 years old, off a farm outside a little town in Nebraska, and I'd never in my life imagined cold like that existed anywhere on God's earth. There was a man in my squad, hit bad in an ambush along that mountain road, and by the time I got to him, I couldn't find a breath in him at all. No pulse I could feel through gloves too frozen to feel much of anything. Every voice of reason in my head told me he was already gone. I picked him up anyway, carried him 11 miles down that mountain, not knowing for most of it whether I was carrying a living man or carrying a body. I just couldn't bring myself to leave in the snow. I grew up on a farm outside a little Nebraska town, corn and cattle and long, flat winters that I thought back then had taught me everything I needed to know about cold. My daddy worked that land his whole life, and his daddy before him. And I figured I'd do the same until the Army had other plans for a farm boy who could shoot straight and follow orders. I shipped out to Korea in the fall of 1950, green as new corn, alongside boys from every corner of the country, all of us learning fast that nothing back home had prepared us for mountains like that, cold like that. An enemy that came at you out of the dark in numbers that didn't seem possible. There was a man in my squad, older than most of us by a handful of years, name of Harold Bennett, out of some little town in Wisconsin. Quiet fella, steady, the kind of man other men naturally fell in line behind without anybody making it official. He'd looked out for me since the day I joined that squad, showed me how to keep my feet dry, how to ration what little warmth a body could hold on to out there. By December, we'd become about as close as two men can get in a place, trying that hard to kill both of us. The retreat south from the reservoir was its own kind of war, separate almost from the fighting that had come before it. Miles and miles of mountain road, narrow as a goat path in places, with the enemy dug into high ground on both sides the whole way down, picking at our column whenever the mood struck them. We were maybe 3 days into that retreat when the ambush hit us hard, close range, catching a section of our column strung out along a stretch of road with nowhere to take cover except the ditches on either side. Harold was ahead of me when it happened. I heard him go down more than I saw it. A sound I still hear some nights, sharp and sudden, followed by nothing at all. I got to him crouched low, bullets still cutting the air over both our heads, and I turned him over expecting to find him hurt bad, but breathing. What I found instead was a man gone still in a way that terrified me more than the gunfire did. No breath I could find. No pulse I could feel through frozen gloves that weren't giving me any honest information at all. Every man near me was shouting to keep moving, keep moving. The column can't stop. I should have left him. I understood that even then, in the middle of it, some cold, clear part of my mind, laying out the arithmetic, same as Sergeant O'Connor might have. No, wrong story, different man. My mistake. Laying out the arithmetic plain. A man who isn't breathing isn't going to get any less dead by me risking my own life and slowing the whole column down, trying to save him. I picked him up anyway, got him over my shoulders in a fireman's carry. my legs nearly buckling under the weight of him, plus my own gear, plus a pack already heavier than any man should carry through snow that deep, and I started walking. The lieutenant saw me doing it, shouted something about leaving him for graves registration, following procedure. I didn't stop walking. I don't fully know where the strength came from to just keep putting one foot in front of the other, carrying a man I was fairly certain was already gone. But something in me had decided somewhere between one heartbeat and the next that I wasn't setting him down in that snow, not Harold, not the man who'd taught me how to keep my feet dry 3 weeks earlier. Like it was the most important lesson in the world. The first mile was the worst in some ways, because that's when my body understood fully what I'd taken on. My legs screamed at me. My lungs burned with cold air, too thin and too sharp for the effort I was asking of them. Harold's weight settled into my shoulders like something permanent. Like I might carry that particular weight the rest of my natural life, whether I wanted to or not. I talked to him while I walked. Don't ask me why. Some part of me needed to fill that silence with something besides the sound of my own boots, crunching through snow and ice. I told him about my farm back in Nebraska, about a girl back home I'd been writing letters to, about anything at all that came into my head. The same way you talk to a man who could actually hear you. Other men in the column offered to spell me, take a turn, carrying him, and I let a couple of them for short stretches when my legs genuinely couldn't manage another step. But something in me kept pulling him back onto my own shoulders before too long. I don't know if that was loyalty or stubbornness, or something closer to needing to see this particular thing through myself, all the way to whatever end it was heading toward. By the 4th mile, I'd stopped talking to him and started praying instead, quiet under my breath, the kind of praying a man does when he's run clean out of his own strength and needs to borrow some from somewhere else. My hands had gone past cold into something closer to numb, and I remember worrying, distant and strange, whether I'd still have fingers to write my mother a letter when this was all over, assuming I lived long enough to write one. The column moved slow, stopping and starting, fighting off probes from the high ground every few hours, and every stop I'd set Harold down as gentle as I could manage and check him again. No breath, no pulse I could find. Every single time, that same cold verdict. And every single time I picked him back up anyway when the column moved again. A medic caught up to us around mile 6, checked Harold quick in the middle of moving, and told me plain, not unkind but not gentle either, that I should let Graves registration handle him from here, that I was wearing myself down to nothing for a man who wasn't coming back regardless. I nodded like I understood. Then I picked him up again anyway. Mile 9 or 10, I honestly couldn't tell you which by that point. Something happened that I've spent 75 years trying to explain to people who weren't there and mostly failing to find the words for. I'd stopped to check him again, same routine I'd done a dozen times by then, expecting the same cold silence I'd found every time before. I put my ear right down close to his mouth, the way you do when your hands have gone too numb to trust for anything as delicate as finding a pulse. I felt it before I heard it. A breath, small, weak, barely enough to stir the frost that had gathered on his collar, but real, unmistakably real. I don't have words for what went through me in that moment. I've tried over the years to explain it to my children, to my grandchildren, and the closest I've ever come is this. It felt like the whole frozen world went quiet and warm, for just one single second. Like something had reached down into that mountain pass and handed me back something I'd already grieved. "He's breathing," I said out loud, to nobody and everybody at once, my voice cracking in a way that had nothing to do with the cold. "He's breathing." I carried Harold Bennett the last 2 miles down that mountain with a strength I still can't fully account for, given how empty my body had felt just an hour before. Whatever I'd been running on those first 9 miles, grief and stubbornness and something like love for a man who looked out for me, the last 2 miles ran on something different entirely, something closer to hope, which turns out to be a whole lot lighter to carry than the alternative. If you've ever carried something, or someone, well past the point where anyone would have understood you letting go, I hope you'll subscribe and sit with more of these stories with me. I think there's something worth remembering in every mile some man walked for another man, whether the ending was good or not, because the walking itself meant something regardless. Because here's what those 11 miles taught me at 19 years old, that I've carried the rest of my 95 years. Sometimes the only thing standing between a man and the end of him is somebody else refusing, flat out refusing, to accept it's already over. Harold Bennett lived. Field hospital at Hungnam got him stable, and he made a full recovery over the months that followed, though I didn't learn the whole extent of it until letters started catching up with me months later, back stateside myself by then. We stayed close the rest of our lives, Harold and me. He drove out to Nebraska more times than I can count over the decades, sat at my table for more Thanksgivings than most of my own cousins managed. He named his first son after me, middle name, not first, but I've never once let him forget. It mattered to me all the same. He passed 8 years ago now, peaceful, surrounded by his own children and grandchildren in that same house in Wisconsin he'd built a whole life inside of after that mountain nearly took it all from him. I drove up for the funeral, stood in the back of that church, and thought about 11 miles of frozen road, more than I thought about almost anything else that whole day. I still think about the moment I felt that breath return under my ear more than anything else from that whole war. Not the fighting, not the cold. Though God knows the cold left its own mark on me that's never fully thawed out. Even 75 years later, that one breath, small and stubborn, against all the evidence stacked against it. I've got a great-grandson now who likes to ask about the war, same as most of them eventually do. And I tell him about Harold. Not the fighting parts mostly. Just the walking. Just the moment a man who wasn't breathing started breathing again because somebody refused to accept the alternative. If you've got somebody in your life you carried further than anybody expected you to, literally or otherwise, I'd love to hear about them in the comments. Don't tell me their name. I'll remember it. Same as I've remembered Harold's for 75 years now. I've got more mountains, more miles, more men worth remembering. I'll be here whenever you're ready for the next one.